that paralyzes and mimics death is a credible explanation of the zombie myth, because it concludes that the victim hasn't really died. And if they haven't really died, then you don't have to explain how they come to be resurrected. Most of us don't believe that the dead can physically return, but there are many who believe that the dead can communicate with the living. Many ordinary people, for example, claim to have had a supernatural experience, perhaps even to have seen a ghost. And perhaps the most famous of these cases is that of the Enfield poltergeist.
It was obvious from the word go that it was a real case.
Maurice Grosse is an investigator of paranormal phenomena.
Even now, 25 years later, I think back and I think it's crazy stuff.
In September 1977, he was called to this house in Enfield, North London. It was the home of a mother and her 4 children.
We were just sat there looking at one another. We didn't know what to do. We were so scared.
The chair came off the floor and I saw it slide off to the right, about 3.5 to 4 feet before it came to rest.
The family and other eyewitnesses claimed that furniture was moving as though pushed by an invisible force.
I'm invisible.
Objects were flying through the air, and there were strange sounds coming from the walls. Desperate for an explanation, they turned to the Psychical Society. For first-time investigator Maurice Grosse, this was uncharted territory.
One has to be very careful, of course, that you're not brought in on a fraudulent type case. Somebody's having a joke. For all I know, it might have been just kids playing around or anything. I had no preconceptions at all.
Maurice rigged tape recorders in different rooms to capture events as they happened. He didn't have to wait long. Bizarre events had become a daily occurrence.
Listen very closely, and you'll hear Janet being pulled out of bed.
How the hell did she get through there? This time Janet was thrown right out of the room onto the stairs.
Maurice was soon convinced he was dealing with a poltergeist. Chris French is a psychologist specializing in anomalous human behavior.
Traditionally, the word poltergeist means noisy spirit, and traditionally people have assumed that there is some kind of spirit involved. Modern parapsychologists often have a slightly different approach. They feel that what the disturbances are caused by is externalized energy, coming often from a troubled adolescent.
Recent divorce had disrupted the family, and it was certainly true that 11-year-old Janet was becoming the center of reported activity. A remote stills camera was set up in Janet's bedroom to capture everything that happened. Maurice was utterly convinced by the evidence it was to provide.
The pictures to me suggest that she's being levitated vertically.
Skeptics suggested that Janet might simply be jumping. But photographer Graham Morris, who rigged the camera, said it was operating at such a fast shutter speed that it couldn't be a hoax.
She started off flat in bed, normally. The next shot, the covers had come away. Her arms were flat by her side. There is no picture of her between flat and coming out of the bed. She's gone from that to that She was literally flying in a sixth of a second.
Morris now felt that he had important evidence to support the presence of a poltergeist, but he was even more convinced when the poltergeist found a voice.
This recording you're going to hear now is the first time it spoke, and I spoke to you about, when I challenged it to speak.
Let me hear you say my name. Come on, let me hear you say my name. Come on, my name's Morris. Let me hear you say it. Morris.
And that voice was coming out of the mouth of 11-year-old Janet.
My name's God.
So, what you're saying is we couldn't get rid of you by praying to God.
My name's God.
Does that sound like a child's voice? Just judge for yourself.
Dozens of other witnesses heard Janet speak in this voice.
Tell him they can protect me from you killing me.
From what the voice told him, Morris came to believe that the spirit of a dead man called Bill was speaking through Janet. And Morris later discovered that Bill was a real person who had lived and died in the house.
And I fell asleep and I died in a chair in the corner downstairs.
We didn't know that at the time. As far as I know, nobody knew about it. It was only on our later research we found out that's exactly how he died.
The newspapers that picked up the story seemed convinced that Janet had indeed been possessed.
I'm invisible.
But the skeptics were not so sure.
Now, I mean, there's no dispute at all from anyone that with respect to where this deep, gravelly voice is coming from, it's coming from Janet. Those who would argue that we're actually hearing a spirit voice would say that a child of that age couldn't maintain this kind of deep, guttural voice for a long period without doing serious damage to the vocal cords. I'd say we don't know what the effects would be, and certainly Janet's uncle did actually claim that she trained herself to speak in this voice.
So was the whole thing just a hoax? And if it was, how could so many eyewitnesses, and Morris himself, who spent 18 months investigating the case, have been fooled?
I think we'd all like to believe in life after death. I mean, it's a very comforting notion. And so any particular case which seems to supply evidence suggesting that we do survive bodily death is something that we're going to want to be true. It might be worth mentioning that Maurice Groves himself had actually lost a young daughter tragically a couple of years before this investigation began. And on top of that, you've got a man who had dedicated his life to psychical research and desperately wanted to find a case like this.
The family don't want to discuss what happened. But at the time, they did sign written statements declaring that they were telling the truth about events that took place in their home.
Out there, people can make up their own minds what it's all about. What I have done, and what we have done, is present the evidence, and we believe that speaks for itself. No matter what these armchair critics say, this evidence speaks for itself.
So it all depends which side of the fence you're on. Either you accept Morris's interpretation of events, or you think he and the other witnesses were hoaxed. But it is not always quite that black and white. The world's largest ghost hunt, which took place in Scotland earlier this year, revealed that there is sometimes more to ghosts than simple trickery. A lone piper is said to walk the battlements of Edinburgh Castle, and its dungeons are said to be haunted by the ghosts of French soldiers imprisoned there in the 18th century. In fact, Edinburgh is reputed to be the most haunted city in Europe. It's here that Dr. Richard Wiseman and a team of researchers set up a ghost hunt, using a battery of high-tech equipment and over 240 volunteers. They sought out the place described as the most haunted in Edinburgh, the vaults which lie under the South Bridge. Fran Hollingrake is an expert on the city's ghosts.
Okay, just to reiterate, ladies and gentlemen, please be careful of the stairs because they are very worn. Follow me.
5 years giving guided tours here has convinced her that the vaults deserve their reputation.
Okay.
Hardly a week has gone by without somebody having something strange happen to them. Generally, it's the customers who come on the tours that have the experiences, but on several occasions I myself have experienced strange phenomena.
These chambers have only recently been reopened after being walled up for years. Since then, there have been reported sightings of 8 different spirits, including that of an angry man wielding a knife and a mischievous little boy.
There was one particular room that I was standing in, and I was wearing a long black cloak, and I was holding a candle in my hands, and suddenly there was this sort of sharp tug, and my candle in my hands moved very sharply. And being the professional I am, I sort of carried on talking, and it happened again, this sort of sharp tug. And I remember thinking, go away, little boy, I'm busy. I'm like you do to a 5-year-old, look, go, stop bothering me. And it didn't happen again, and I was quite shaken by it, but I sort of carried on, and it wasn't until I finished that the full force of it sort of hit me, and I started to get quite anxious about it.
So were Fran and other witnesses experiencing something real? Dr. Wiseman wanted to find out if his volunteers would experience similar sensations.
First of all, we've no idea what you're going to experience. We're not going to pull any tricks on you at all. This isn't one of these things where someone's going to jump out on you. That you have my word, take my word.
To understand what was going on, he needed his volunteers to spend time in the vaults under controlled conditions.
So we're going to be placing you into one of the vaults on your own, okay? And we just want you to relax and see if you experience anything unusual.
The volunteers were left alone in 10 separate chambers, all rigged with monitoring equipment. Some of the rooms had a reputation for being haunted, while others did not. But neither Dr. Wiseman nor his volunteers knew which was which. The volunteers were left alone to record everything that happened.
Well, it's the end of the day, and it's been quite an exciting one. Around about 40% of people have reported some sort of experience.
Coldness on the ankle, and it was like something brushed it, and that's when I was sort of squeal. Very brave.
After a few minutes I felt a really hot burning itch on the inside of my left arm, and it got hotter and itchier.
A person here feeling that there was somebody actually standing behind them.
I can hear what sounds like somebody else breathing. That's quite terrifying.
Another person reporting there actually has a sensation of being watched. One person has actually seen a figure of a man with a leather apron.
Okay, there's just no way I'd come down here on my own again. I would have to be in a party or a group, but I wouldn't be left alone on here.
When Dr. Wiseman analyzed the data, he discovered something very interesting. The people who had experienced ghostly phenomena were those who had been in the haunted vaults. But was this proof that there were spirits present? Dr. Wiseman's equipment offered other possible explanations.
And what we discovered is the haunted vaults have more sense of air movement in there than the control vaults. So maybe people are walking in, feeling a draft, and that's the unusual experience. Now, we also found out that the haunted vaults have a rather unusual variation in their magnetic fields. And so, and this is a controversial theory, but it's still a possibility that people are walking in and those fields are having a rather unusual effect on their bodies and maybe their brains, and that accounts for the experiences that they're having there.
Could magnetic fields really make us feel a ghostly presence? Dr. Michael Persinger thinks they can. In a specially built chamber, he can induce supernatural experiences by using electromagnetic fields.
If we apply the fields in a specific sequence, we can induce the experience of a sensed presence, that there are some entities standing beside the person.
Dr. Persinger has found that he can recreate these experiences by exposing volunteers' brains to intense magnetic fields. This volunteer is wearing a special helmet, rigged to stimulate her brain. Under its influence, she starts to experience something which sounds chillingly familiar.
It's as though something's got hold of my left leg and my ankle. Oh, this isn't very nice. Horrid. It's as though something's pulling me, but I can't see what it is doing it. I'm frightened. This is odd. I don't know what I'm frightened about. I feel really scared.
The sensations this woman described under the influence of a magnetic field are very similar to those experienced by the volunteers in the vaults in Edinburgh.
I felt a very sharp tug on my cloak, and it happened twice. And I have no idea. I thought I'd trodden on my cloak or caught it on a nail, but there was absolutely nothing there.
I'm so scared.
There was definitely a feeling over there of something going past.
Although the magnetic fields in the vaults in Edinburgh were not as strong as those used by Dr. Persinger, they may still help to explain what the volunteers experienced. But there are other invisible forces that can cause us to see ghosts. Strange things had been happening at scientist Vic Tandy's laboratory in Warwick. The cleaning lady said she'd seen a ghost, and other colleagues reported a strange sense of presence in the room. But Vic was dubious, until one night he was alone in the lab.
While I was working, I began to feel as if there was somebody watching me. You know, this feeling that there's somebody sort of, staring at you. So I looked round, there's nobody there. I started to feel the hairs standing up on the back of my neck. I started to feel as if there was a chill. I started to perspire. And slowly, I noticed almost moving shadows by my shoulders, as if there was something moving behind me. And then this sort of grey object appeared. First of all, just very much in my peripheral vision, and then slowly started to move round to the side. As you can imagine, that was a bit worrying. I thought, well, there's nothing else I can do really. I've got to turn and look at this thing. And so as I turned to kind of face it just disappeared. Just as if, like smoke, just poof, gone.
The next day, Vic was making some adjustments to a thin metal blade when it began to vibrate, apparently of its own accord.
after the night before. I thought, oh, this is too much. So the hackles went up, all of the, the same effects from the night before. But eventually I thought, no, this is getting some energy from somewhere.
But what invisible force could make an object move in this way? Vic suspected it could be a sound wave. Some quick detective work told him there was a sound wave present that was vibrating at a frequency of 19 Hertz. From there, Vic was able to track down the source, an industrial fan, recently installed in the laboratory.
We turned the fan off, the foil blade stopped moving, and the room was a different place. It was almost as though somebody sort of thrown open the doors, and it was much less oppressive.
The sound waves which Vic had detected are known as infrasound. They are at a frequency too low for the human ear to detect, but they can affect the eye, making it vibrate.
So the movement would smear something in your peripheral vision, which is very similar to the kind of effect that I experienced. It could also cause you to hyperventilate, and hyperventilation can cause you to feel panic.
Vic was convinced that infrasound, produced by the fan, had caused him to see the grey figure and heightened his feelings of fear. And if this was the case, could it explain other sightings of ghosts? In a 14th century cellar with a haunted reputation, he went in search of low-frequency sound waves.
There was a reading there that showed us that there was the presence of infrasound, and that it was peaking at the door, which is where these effects are reported. I think that actually a significant proportion of the sort of ghosts, where there's a grey object, where there's this feeling of presence, can be explained by infrasound.
In this case, Vic couldn't be sure what was generating the infrasound, and he is keen to take his research further. But can infrasound and magnetic fields explain everything that the volunteers taking part in the Edinburgh ghost hunt experienced? Emma Beebe was left alone in the chamber with the most haunted reputation of all. And it's something she will never forget.
I suddenly heard something in the room with me, a noise, and I couldn't tell you what it was. I thought it was part of the experiment. I thought it was some sort of elaborate setup or trick or something to make me more frightened.
I can hear what sounds like somebody else breathing. That's quite terrifying. I'm pretty anxious here.
That's what it sounded like, which is not the kind of breathing you want to hear, whether there's a real person or not.
Okay, I can definitely hear somebody here.
As I started to talk about it, it seemed to restrain itself. It tried to make itself quieter. It felt like an interaction. It's very hard to resolve it. I can't explain it. I can't explain it to other people. I can't explain it to myself. And I'm in two minds about it still. I can either think there was something in that room with me, and if there was something in that room with me, then I don't know what to believe anymore.
It's easy to dismiss people who report bizarre experiences as unreliable, hysterical, deluded. But perhaps we can find a place for apparently supernatural events in our world. We've seen how fear of ghosts can be generated by natural phenomena. Our belief in werewolves can be triggered by a rare mental illness, and how zombies could be the product of simple but effective poisoning. All these explanations may in time prove wrong. Some of them, after all, seem a little improbable. But as the great detective Sherlock Holmes once said, "Once you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth."
I'm so scared.